Hi, and welcome to the PowerPoint that will discuss early reading instruction. What we should do for those early readers, or those readers who are missing the early components necessary to be successful in reading. We'll first look at the 6 principles of early reading instruction. We recommend beginning phonemic awareness as early as possible. Phonemic awareness being manipulating with letters and sounds, segmenting, blending, substitution. Teach each letter phoneme relationship and teach it explicitly, remembering that it is really much more important that they can identify the sound more than just recognizing that letter. You want to teach frequent, highly regular letter-sound relationships systematically, and those are the ones that we emphasize initially. I show children exactly how to sound out words. I give children connected decodable text to practice those grapheme phoneme relationships and use as interesting stories as possible to develop their language comprehension. Comprehension. In regard to comprehension, it requires cognitive ability, which includes those complex reasoning skills. When we're working with comprehension, we always want to activate our students' prior background knowledge, their schema. We want them to use the schema which they do have, connect it with new text to build on that comprehension. Whenever we're going to work with comprehension with a story, a passage, whatever skills are necessary to understand the text, we want to make sure that we're very explicit and teach those skills. We teach and model how we would use those skills. When working with comprehension, we always begin with those words, so it's more like vocabulary and what those words mean, working into phrases, building into sentences, paragraphs, passages, and pages of text. When we teach comprehension, we begin with literal comprehension and then build and move towards inferencing and evaluation. Those processing skills that we need to teach and model and demonstrate include decoding quickly, summarizing and paraphrasing, simplifying syntactic and semantic information, critical reading, and study skills. I mentioned that we start with literal questions. The who, what, when, where, and how. They're very literal, and they can easily be found within the text. It's based on explicit information from the text. I model, I show them how to do it. If we can't answer the question, we go back in the text and we locate it. I model paraphrasing, getting them to summarize, main idea, supporting details. We use lots of visuals with story maps, Venn diagrams, thinking maps. I love foldables. Diana Zykes got a whole bunch of foldables. The knowledge base that the students will need to have and learn has to do with syntax and word order, parts of speech, semantics, which has to do with meaning, being able to read and understand factual information, logic, making use of logic, using their schema, connecting it to the text or the passage, and most importantly is getting them to that strategic knowledge, which is metacognition. My metacognitive readers are my good readers, and they know when they know when they don't know, and they do something about it. A lot of my individuals know that they're reading, and they don't get it, but they don't do anything about it. They just keep going. They just skip it. A metacognitive reader knows when they know, keeps going, knows when they don't know, but fixes it. They may read on to the end of the sentence and use context clues, read on to the end of the paragraph, go back and reread. They may look at pictures, diagrams, charts to aid their comprehension. They may look up the word in a dictionary. They have skills and strategies which they use to fix those comprehension areas where they're having difficulty. Vocabulary is very important. When we talk about vocabulary, we're talking about decodable vocabulary and sight vocabulary. We teach and learn them differently. If it's decodable vocabulary, we trace with our finger pads, we spell and say it, we read it in context, and we create sentences with it. We make booklets with our vocabulary. When we make our sentences, my students write their sentences, and they write that vocabulary word in a color of their choice. We always have them draw a picture to go along with that sentence, so when we review these little booklets, that picture which they drew will help them to recall the sentence. When I'm working with decodable vocabulary, I often use phonograms like AT is at, put an F in front, fat, put an H in front, hat, put a C in front, cat. When I teach phonograms, I can increase my children's vocabulary by 500 words. Sight vocabulary, on the other hand, I don't want them to sound it out. I want them to see it and say it within a second. We teach it initially, and we're going to teach it in context. We're going to look at it. We're going to say the whole word, say the whole sentence, and then I'm going to look at it in isolation, and I'm going to see it and say it, see it and say it. I do have them create their own sentences with these sight words. When they write their sentences in their booklets with the sight words, they write the vocabulary word in red, and then we draw a picture. The reason we write the vocabulary word in red, which is based on something from Project Read, when I see the word in red, I know I cannot decode it. It is a word that I am supposed to know upon sight within 1 second. Vocabulary. I am very particular about the words that I actually teach. These are context words. I want to activate my students' schema, their prior knowledge. When I teach these content-laden vocabulary words, I get my students involved in that process as much as possible by seeing the word, hearing it, saying it, touching it. I use context-laden sentences. The sentences are so laden with clues and cues that my students can define them. Or I have so many pictures or sounds to help them to identify that word that they define it, and then we compare it to a formal dictionary definition like the Webster. I do not provide the definition for these vocabulary terms. I always also read through my passage to see, does the passage do a really good job, or does the author do a really good job of providing pictures that would explain this term, or providing clues and cues within the text? If the author does, then when we get to that section in the book, we will then discuss it and figure out the meaning. Instruction. You first must identify what skill or skill the students are lacking, and based on their areas of deficiency, I group accordingly. I continuously monitor these students, provide positive feedback. It's through repetition and drill that we tend to move it into an automatic level, and I make adjustments. My adjustments are based on that continuous monitoring. My instructional groups will change. They need to change based on my students' progress. When we're doing remedial reading instruction, it is important that we remember that these individuals need extra instruction. Maybe they need it presented in a different way, in a different format. The sooner I can do this remediation, or the earlier on, the better success my students will have. That person who is most knowledgeable, or has the most degrees as far as the knowledge-based educational background to help, that person is the one who needs to work with the lowest students. It needs to be a well-designed program. It should be moving at a rapid or quick pace, and it needs to be motivating and an enjoyable experience for the students, as enjoyable as possible. The remedial instruction should start with a review of previously learned material. Success builds success. I want to start with something my students can do. There's going to be repetition and drill for my remedial reader. I'm going to get them as involved as possible in kinesthetic and tactile. The more modalities I can get involved for the child, the better chance of them remembering it. I teach one new concept at a time, and I teach it to the point of mastery before I begin something else that is new. Immediate reinforcement and feedback is critical and crucial. I constantly help to activate their schema. I provide as much background knowledge as I possibly can. I allow sufficient time for response or wait time. I try to limit my directions as much as possible, giving them one or two directions at a time and keeping them simple. The environment in which we provide this remediation is free of distractions. My students always have their back to the window or to the rest of the class. We make it as hands-on, as engaging. I provide visuals as much as I possibly can. These are my general suggestions for remedial instruction for early childhood reading. I hope you find them helpful.